Hi, welcome to part 6 in our exploration of Asian art. We've been looking at both Hindu and Buddhist traditions in art. Now we're going to be looking at Buddhism and how it spreads to the north and northeast. So this is a gray schist Buddha. The schist or schist, it's a very hard stone sculpture represents the transformation of the Buddha iconography and the impact of cultural influences, specifically Hellenistic culture. We'll be looking at the Hellenistic culture in ancient Greece. This was one of the last periods in ancient Greece during the reign of Alexander the Great. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. Before the 1st century BCE, most images associated with Buddhism represented symbols of Buddha. Beginning in the Gandhara region, present-day northern Pakistan and eastern Afghanistan, artisans began depicting Buddha's human form. One of the earliest images of Buddha, this sculpture was created between 100 and 300 CE and is discovered in the 19th century at Jamal Ghauri, which is in present-day Pakistan. Most Gandharan sculpture implemented schist as the primary medium. When light shines directly onto the stone, it glints and gleams due to the crystal fragments in the stone. In present-day Afghanistan, schist was abundant throughout the mountains and came in many different colors. This sculpture in particular is composed of gray schist, and local artisans carved the sculpture. This sculpture was created during the Kushan Empire, which lasted from the 1st century BCE to the 3rd century BCE. The Kushan Empire encompassed the entire northwest Indian territory. Gandhara, a region located in the Kushan Empire, was considered a crossroads or a broad spectrum of cultural currents. This region experienced a cultural infusion, especially Hellenistic influences. And so basically, Hellenistic influences were ancient Greek influences, like the drapery is one that you can, these kind of folds in the drapery, and it looks very three-dimensional. The body has weight to it, and the drapery seems, I mean, it's a little bit stylized, but there's this appearance that it's, there's a body underneath. With these new cultural integrations, trade, religion, and art flourished during this time. For instance, international trade thrived in the Kushan Empire. The Kushan economy was one of the 3 economies throughout the world that had gold-based currencies. During this time, a new school of Buddhism was forming. Mahayana, unlike Theravada, Mahayana and reinterpreted the Dharma, expanded the role of the Bodhisattva, and introduced the concept of Pure Land. The Silk Road enabled Buddhist missionaries and monks to spread Buddhism. In addition, Hellenistic and Roman culture influenced Gandharan art. For instance, many Western artisans entered Gandhara and began to sculpt distinct Hellenistic features, especially in the face and clothing. So again, you can kind of see like features and modeling in the face. By combining Buddhism and art and images, missionaries were able to use these images to spread Buddhism despite a language barrier. Furthermore, these sculptures of Buddha assisted followers to reach enlightenment by picturing Buddha in his or her mind. Generally, sculptures such as this sat in front of stupas. These sculptures would have had various themes and meanings, but would have served as visual texts to portray either Buddha's life or his teachings. Ultimately, these objects served as an outlet for ritual worship. Within a broad spectrum of world history, this sculpture symbolizes a transformation of the Buddha image and the influence of other cultures. Originally, images of Buddha were symbolic of his life, such as footprints and the Bodhi tree. But with the spread of Mahayana, and Hellenistic influences, Buddhist art began to portray images of Buddha. Creating the image of Buddha began during the 1st century BCE in 2 locations, Mathura and Gandhara. Through the images of Buddha, Mahayana believers could undergo spiritual devotions, and they believed Buddha resided in the images and could achieve spiritual merit. These images were initially carved near stupas. With the Hellenistic and Roman influences, Gandhara sculpture portrayed various Greek and Roman art. For instance, the face resembles the Greek god Apollo. So obviously we'll be comparing this sculpture when we get to ancient Greece. And the robe is similar to a Greek toga with the many folds. Furthermore, the wavy hair is also adopted from Greek culture. During this time, Christian iconography was also developing. Early 3rd century paintings in Roman catacombs are the earliest examples. Initially, Jesus was represented with symbols such as a fish and a cross, and it was not until later that his image became represented. Thus, Jesus and Buddha both were portrayed through symbols before they were depicted through images. This culture didn't circulate through world trade, but the image of Buddha spread with the assistance of the many travelers who visited Gandhara and then continued to travel by the Silk Road. Thus, the image was able to spread across the world, and in effect, the Buddhist religion grew into a universal religion. To date, the image of Buddha to this date, the image of Buddha remains one of the most recognized and iconic images in the world. We're also going to be looking we're listening to a podcast on this image as well, which is really interesting. So we're going to be looking at some different representations of Buddha. Prior to their recent destruction, the 6th and 7th century rock-cut Buddha sculptures in Bamiyan Valley of central Afghanistan were considered the largest in the world. Known collectively as the Bamiyan Buddhas, the 2 monumental sculptures have amazed both Buddhist and non-Buddhist visitors for more than 1,000 years. Like many of the world's great ancient monuments, little is known about who commissioned the Bamiyan Buddhas or the sculptors who carved them. However, their very existence points to the importance of the Buddhist faith in Bamiyan Valley during this period. So Bamiyan is located between the Indian subcontinent to the southeast and Central Asia to the north, which made it an important location close to one of the most important branches of the Silk Route. The Silk Route was an ancient series of linked trade routes that connected the east to the west and carried both material, wealth, and ideas. Bamiyan's central location along the Silk Route, along with its fertile plains amid harsh terrain, made it an ideal location for merchants and missionaries to stop during their travels. Many of the missionaries and merchants in this area during the middle of the 1st millennium were practitioners of the Buddhist faith. Buddhism had long been an important religion in the region, having been introduced during the early Kushan period. The Kushan Empire controlled the region that now consists of Afghanistan, Pakistan, northern India, and parts of China. It lasted from the 2nd century BCE until the 3rd century CE. Buddhism spread in part because it was not location specific. Believers did not need to worship at a particular temple or at a particular site as part of their practice. Worship could take place anywhere at any time. This freedom resulted in the emergence of Buddhist cave and architecture, Buddhist caves and architecture throughout Asia. So what you're looking at, sorry, I missed the L in landscape. Lands is a landscape and archaeological remains of the Bamiyan Valley. Indeed, if one visits Bamiyan today, one will see nearly 100 Buddhist caves carved along 1,300 meters of cliff face. It is against this backdrop of carved caves that the 2 monumental Buddha images were carved. And you can see where they once were, these niches right here. Prior to their destruction in 2001, 2 monumental Buddha sculptures sculptures could be seen carved into the cliff facing in the Bamiyan Valley. The larger of the two figures, located on the western end, on the right side of the photo, measured 175 feet in height. The art historian Susan Huntington has argued that it represented the Buddha um, Vajrayana. The smaller of the two monumental statues located to the east depicted the Buddha Shakyamuni. These figures were, and so these are just different representations of Buddha at different stages in his life. The figure was also enormous and measured 120 feet in height. Vajrayana is the celestial or transcendent Buddha. Shakyamuni, also called Siddhartha Gautama, is the historical Buddha, who is believed to have lived sometime between the 6th and 4th centuries BCE. Both images were carved into niches on the cliffside in high relief. The area near the heads of both Buddha figures and the area around the larger Buddha's feet were carved in the round, allowing worshippers to circumambulate. Circumambulation, which is the act of walking around an object such as a stupa, remember, is kind of like a reliquary mound, or an image of the Buddha, is a common practice in Buddhist worship. The two large Buddha images reflect the international environment of the Bamiyan Valley and were influenced by the art and cultures of India, Central Asia, and even ancient Greek culture. For example, both Buddhas wore flowing robes and have been described as having wavy curls of hair. This hairstyle and flowing drapery are elements rooted in early Gandhara Buddhist imagery that combined Hellenistic Greek traditions of representation with Indian subject matter. Gandhara was the name of the region of Pakistan and parts of Afghanistan that were conquered by Alexander the Great in 330 BCE. Alexander vastly expanded the Greek Empire and introduced classical art and culture to the regions he controlled. This Hellenistic influence was adopted by the Buddhist artists of Gandhara and influenced representations there for hundreds of years. So here you have the plan. You can see the footprint of the feet. And then obviously this is what they're referring to, this sort of Hellenistic style of the drapery, and that it looks like a toga. Much of what we know about the monumental Buddha sculptures come from the Chinese monk Son Sang, who traveled to Bamiyan in 643 and documented his travels in the text The Great Tang Records of Western Regions. As the earliest text describes the Buddha images in his writings provide us with remarkable descriptions of the sculpture and the vibrant communities that inhabited the region. He wrote, "When merchants coming and going happened to witness visions of heavenly deities, whether as good omens or as predictions of disaster, they worship the deities to pray for blessedness. There are several